So, I was born in 1939 under the British Mandate of Palestine. But in my passport, I put place of birth Israel, even though at the time it was not Israel. And now those early years, those first few years of my life, I remember things were not that easy. There was Arab uprising, and even my uncle was involved in, I believe, the Palmach or the Haganah at that time. And one day he came home, he had been wounded in some skirmish, and my grandmother had to hide him in the basement so the British wouldn't find him. And also there was some shortages. We were rationing of food, and times were difficult. So, of course, a year later, in 1940, this was 1947, and in 1948, of course, I misspoke. In 1947, my parents decided to come to Akron, Ohio. My uncle had a building business, and my father decided to join him. So I went, of course, with them. I was a young child. I went with them to Akron, Ohio. And in Akron, Ohio, I was at that point about 19 years old. I enrolled in the University of Akron. My dream was to become a lawyer. And so I enrolled in the University of Akron and studied pre-law. While I was doing that, we joined a Orthodox synagogue. And I forgot to mention, I grew up in with an Orthodox family. We kept Chabad, we kept kosher, and so I grew up in a very Orthodox environment. So when we moved to Akron, we joined an Orthodox synagogue, and they needed a Hebrew school teacher. So I had never taught before, and I was recruited because I spoke Hebrew. I read and wrote and spoke Hebrew. And I was recruited to teach children. I was about 19 or 20 years old, and I never taught before. So here I was in front of a classroom, and I wasn't sure what I had to do. But as the time went by, and I taught them to read so they could also read from the Siddur, I taught them about the holidays, the Jewish holidays, and what it meant to be Jewish. I discovered that I was doing something wonderful, that I was teaching future Jewish generations what it meant to be Jewish, and that was a really great experience for me. A few years later, again for business purposes, my parents moved to Baltimore, Maryland. And while there, my father, on his way to Washington, for some reason, he had an accident and was killed. So I followed my mother to Baltimore. I moved to Baltimore to be with her. And in Baltimore, because my dream was to be a lawyer, I enrolled in law school. And again, because I'd had now this bug to teach Judaism to Jewish children, I also became a school teacher in a congregation in Baltimore, Maryland. And once again, I had this wonderful experience of teaching Jewish children about Judaism and what it meant to be Jewish. And from there, I had my plans to be a lawyer, so I also enrolled in law school in the University of Baltimore Law School. And I went to law school in the morning, and in the afternoon, I went to teach in the Hebrew school. But God had a different plan for me, as I found out. And so one December, my uncle called me and said, "I'm going to Miami. Would you like to go with me?" And of course I said, "Yes, I would love to go with you. I'm going, So we flew to Miami and went to Miami Beach. It had been snowing and cold in Baltimore. And when we got off the plane in Miami, it was 80 degrees. And I'm saying to myself, wow, what am I doing in Baltimore? So As I said, God had a different plan for me. I was going to be a lawyer, and so one day I found myself walking. I didn't know where I was, but I found myself walking on Lincoln Road Mall, which is not really a mall. It's if any of you know Miami Beach, it's really an open air boulevard. And lo and behold, as I was walking, I guess God was pushing me, because I saw a sign that said the Jewish Federation. It had something to do with education, and I'd just been involved in Jewish education. So I went inside and spoke to a gentleman there, and he told me that there was a congregation in Miami Beach, Temple Menorah, that was looking for an educational director. I would be interested. And I'm thinking, Baltimore, -7 degrees, snowing, cold, or Miami Beach, 80 degrees. Yeah. So anyway, I met with Rabbi Abramowitz, who was with the school board at Temple Menorah, and he agreed to hire me, and so I moved to Miami Beach. And this was really a phenomenal experience. We started with a school of about 100 children and ended up with over 600 children. But the real joy in my life, the real satisfaction I had in my life, was I also got involved. I was a director of what's called USY, United Synagogue Youth. These are post-bar mitzvah young people, young adults, and I was involved with them. We took them on Shabbatons. We told them what Shabbat was. We showed them how to live a Jewish life, and this was a really a wonderful experience for me. And I really felt that I was doing something, a mitzvah, if you will, in having an input in the future of Jewish young adults. It was really a wonderful experience. But then again, God had other plans for me. He had long-term plans for me that I didn't know anything about. So from Miami, I'd gotten my real estate license after about 6 years of being with Temple Menorah. I got my real estate license, and I wanted to become a broker. So I don't know why, but I moved to Tampa. As I said, God had purposes for me that I wasn't aware of at the time. And I moved to Baltimore, to Tampa, Florida, opened up a real estate office, which became relatively successful again with God's help. And one day, while I was in Tampa after several years, I got a call from one of my clients who asked me if I would market some buildings he owned in Orlando, Florida. Now, Orlando is about the same distance as Austin is from San Antonio, and I used to drive back and forth to show the buildings to potential buyers. Sometimes they would show up, sometimes they wouldn't, and I got a little bit tired of this. It was a waste of my time in some cases. So I decided the best thing for me to do was to find a real estate broker in Orlando who would show the building and, of course, share the commissions, which is always a nice thing to do. And so I looked for a real estate office in the area, and there was a Century 21 office. So I called and I said, I'd like to speak to the broker. I was going to, talk to the broker about the situation. And the lady answered the phone, and I told the lady what my plans were. Now, while I was in Tampa, my business was doing very well, but I still felt I was an unhappy person. Something was missing in my life, but I didn't know what, but God did know. So here I'm driving to Orlando to meet the broker. This is something I will never forget. I'm standing in the parking lot. I arrived a little bit earlier, and then a car pulls up. And out of this car steps out a woman. It was actually a vision. I saw this woman, and it was like I was struck by lightning. I started to stammer and she probably thought I was the biggest idiot. But somehow or other, I persuaded her to have lunch with me. She's now my present wife, Beatrice, sitting over there. And I also persuaded her later on to marry me, and she said, to my surprise, yes, I will marry you. So it became I knew now why God had sent me to Tampa, because this was my joyous moment in life. And And after about a year or so, we decided we would move to San Antonio. Again, there's another reason for that, but I don't have enough time to go into it. We came to San Antonio. We opened up our own office. She was not only my wife, she was my partner in business, and it became a successful real estate company. And then we looked for some place to express our religiosity. So there was a Temple High at the time, and I became after a while I was on the board, and then became the president for for a few years, from 2014 to 2016. But still something was missing in my life because I've been brought up as an Orthodox Jew. One more thing I just remembered, as a Palestinian, my wife and I flew to Israel a few years ago. And after flying all night in Al Al, and I was tired and exhausted. And anyway, we came to Tel Aviv, to Ben Gurion Airport, and going through immigration, I had a U.S. passport. I didn't have an Israeli passport because my passport place of birth, Israel. So the lady at the immigration, a young lady, very nice young lady, she said to me, "Where's your Israeli passport?" And I, being tired and thinking, I said, "I'm not an Israeli, I'm a Palestinian." Now, there are some Palestinians sitting over here, which I'm happy to report, so they know what I'm referring to. So that, anyway, I explained the situation to her and everything was cool. But fortunately, after my stint with the Temple High, I was very fortunate in meeting Rabbi Block, Rabbi Teldon, Rabbi Morris, and becoming a family of Chabad. And now, because we live close to Bernie, we also become involved with Chabad in Bernie. So this is my story, this is my journey, and I would end with the words, it's not bad for a Palestinian Jewish boy. Right?